Welcome to you all, and to the web audience, which for the last 2 weeks has served in cyberspace. I was in Sydney, Australia, as some of you may know. So I broadcast from there, actually. The magic of technology. Okay, so I see there's some new faces here, so I want to welcome you, as well as faces that I've seen before. According to Jewish mysticism, actually all faces are new and renewed all the time. So I don't know if you knew that. That doesn't mean that you have to check in the mirror every moment to check it out, but it means, according to the mystics, the way they put it is, as we say in the everyday daily prayers, HaMachadish B'tuvei B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh Bereshis, which means that the divine energy that sustains existence is constantly and perpetually being renewed. Which means, though at the surface level we may not see change from second to second, but beneath the surface, the energies within, so to speak, are constantly being regenerated, renewed, refreshed. Think of it like, if you take an example from physics. Today we know that there is no such thing as an inanimate object, which means even if we were all to leave this room right now, and there'd be no people left, and there'd only be benches and chairs and walls and floors, that doesn't mean it's dead. It simply means that on the surface level you do not see, you call the subatomic particles and energy within every strand, every cell of existence. So today it doesn't necessarily require religious belief or any faith at all to know that what you see is not what you get, and the surface of things does not at all reflect reality. Now we all know that personally, that just even if you project a certain thing to others, body language doesn't always tell you or others what people are really like. You know, there people can smile to you, and inside they could want to stab you in the back. God forbid, but I'm sure it never happened in your life, but it happens more than it should. And then the other way around, people could be on the outside seem very sour or bitter, and within there may be something else going on. And with life's experience, as we grow older, you come to learn that rarely do you really see what's happening. I can tell you from my own personal experience that people come speak to me and for counseling in any given area of life, and I always ask the question, so what do you think is the problem? I can tell you that over 95% of the cases or situations that I have been in, the problem people say is the problem is never the real problem. And that's not because someone's trying to hide the fact, it's because we ourselves are not always aware of the real problem. We are aware of the symptoms. You can tell someone that I have pain in my finger, or I feel sad or depressed. That doesn't mean that's your problem. That means that's a symptom of the problem. The root of the problem is much more complicated, and in most cases we're not always aware of our own real issues, which means we're aware of them as far as they affect us consciously, but the unconscious roots and the forces that are at work beneath the surface is even to ourselves usually hidden. And that's part of the challenge of life. If it was not that way, obviously things would be a lot easier to resolve, because as they say, Yedias Hamachla in Hebrew, Chetzi Refuah. Half the knowledge of an illness, the awareness of an illness, is half a cure. So being aware of it helps, obviously, halfway to getting a resolution. And the problem is that we are usually not aware of the illness or to the depth of it. Obviously, I'm not talking about superficial problems and things that don't really matter. I'm talking about truly emotional issues or other fears or insecurities that we deal with. And actually, most people who are fearful or insecure hardly will ever know how insecure they truly are. It's very hard to know how insecure you are. First of all, none of us like to believe that we're that insecure. It's a very demoralizing thing to think about in those terms. And secondly, as I said, it's just impossible to understand our own unconscious. Now, this doesn't mean that it's bad news. It's just part of the reality of life. As I said, the mystics put it this way, that the surface of existence, including our own existence, each of us as an individual, is a somewhat of a cover-up. It conceals that which is within. Now, this isn't a necessarily brilliant statement, it's just a matter of fact, but its profundity, it's in its simplicity. Because if we were truly aware of that all the time, our whole life would be different. The fact is, we do live on the surface level, because that's what we feel and that's what we see. In other words, our five senses are usually what controls our daily activities. Our sensory stimulation, as it's so called, which means what we see with our eyes seduces us, tempts us, what we hear with our ears, what we taste, touch, and smell. Those are the sensory tools that more or less control our lives. And that's why we are consumed by them and seduced by them and distracted by them. And though our minds tell us that there's definitely more going on beneath the surface, but most people don't have the time or the patience to really focus on living from the inside out. We live mostly from the outside in, which is really the essence of what causes you to make decisions. Like, why do you buy certain products? So you may think you have some type of free will, but why don't you discuss it with some Madison Avenue executives of how the billions of dollars that are spent to manipulate people's emotions, to make you feel that if you buy this, or you wear this, or you dress this way, or you drive this way, you will find happiness. Now, this is not meant to be a fire and brimstone against advertising. It's just as an example that wherever you go, there are things stimulating you that are distracting you from what your insiders are like. So, as a small introduction, as I said at the outset, we are renewed every moment, which the good news is that there's always hope. So even if things were a bad day today, or yesterday, or you may be resigned, or find certain situations hopeless, or don't see a way out, that's on the surface level. When you dig deeper, there are waters always running beneath the surface, and the true process of healing, of growth, of change, of getting out from one place that you may be stuck in to get to another place, a more freeing place, the key is not some magic trick. It's really about digging deeper within yourself and discovering those resources that are constantly changing. And when you're able to access that, think of it like a well. You dig deep enough and you reach live waters. And those live waters, if you have the tools to excavate, to draw from that well, and you draw it to the surface, that internal change can cause external change. Which means basically that if we're stuck, it's usually a big part of the problem is that you've convinced yourself that you're stuck, and the outer level makes you feel like you're stuck, and your own psyche, your own attitude, in a way, can be your own worst enemy. If you don't feel there's hope, there's nobody that can give you hope. So only thing a friend can give, a mentor, a person of inspiration can give you, is the hope in yourself, to know that you can dig deeper, and that there's a place in all of us that has the ability to be dynamic and has the power to change. That means no matter how old you are, no matter how hardened you've become on the crust level, the surface level, there's that constant flow of youthful energies within. As they say, the soul never ages. It's only the body that ages. And if you access that soulful energy, you're able to literally create and generate true change in your life. The challenge is, first of all, to access that place, and secondly, to liberate it, to free it. I think I mentioned here, one of the most moving moments that happened to me in the last year was a woman wrote to me before Rosh Hashanah, thanking me for having helped her through difficult situations. Now, I didn't even know who she was, and I don't remember meeting her. It was through email, actually. It was through the weekly emails that I sent out that gave her a lot of strength and hope. She told me during difficult times, she was living in Texas, moved to Seattle, and she went through a terrible, difficult divorce, and then other tragedies occurred to her, and it was like really a bad situation. And she said one of the lifelines that gave her strength and hope were the weekly articles she was reading online and so on. And then she concluded with a quote from Michelangelo, which is from the name the angel Michael, right? Michal Hamalach, named Michelangelo. It was an Italian version of the angel Michal. You'll see why I'm mentioning that in a moment. That he said, he was once asked, how do you create these beautiful sculpt these beautiful images? And I always knew the answer, but I never heard it quite the way he had put it. He said, the actual words were, she quoted to me, were, that I see the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. And she concluded that email saying to me, so I want to thank you for setting my angel free. You know, imagine you get the words like that are very meaningful, personal, but the point, obviously, above all, is that it's not about the sculptor, it's about you. That the angel is within you, and it's only the marble that hardens on the surface level that doesn't let you see it. And it's the good people in your life, the people you can rely on, you can trust, that you can love, and love you, that can help you recognize that angel and just set it free. That is the greatest compliment you can give someone. That it's not that they did anything, they helped you just discover your true self. And that really, in essence, even though it's poetic, it's simple, but it's frankly the hardest thing in life, is how do you free an angel when it's trapped in marble? And that's the difficult part, because this isn't just about a static situation. You know, when it comes to physical marble, so then it's just about getting someone who knows how to carve away and release the angel. When you're talking about human marble, which means the problems that we ourselves create, the problems that were created for us by other human beings, then it gets much more complicated. Because none of us are born locked or trapped. Every newborn child, from the Torah perspective, is like a newborn angel. And when we look at children, what is it that attracts us to children? What is it, the beauty, the simplicity? Is that innocence, the innocence that they have not yet been tainted and in any way contaminated by life and life's pressures and challenges and cruelty, injustice, greed. I mean, the list goes on. And children are like, it's like when you wake up in the morning after a freshly fallen snow. So even if you don't like snow, I happen to like snow, but now is not, of course, the season for snow in New York, but it comes, even though it's hard to imagine in these hot days. So freshly fallen snow, what you find the beauty of it is its purity, because no one has stepped on it yet. So you look at it, it blankets the whole city, it covers up the grime, at least the illusion for a little while, and it's like a white blanket of some type of purity. You know, God could have made that snow should be black. That would be quite depressing. Imagine, the world is black enough, and you have black snow falling from the sky. So it's white, and then of course people wake up, and they start walking through the streets, and then in the beginning is just nice footsteps, but then it becomes a little darker, and you know, we all know what it turns into, and then it becomes, we taint it, we darken it, blacken it. So in many ways a child is the same. As a child is born, the angel is there, alive. Look at how a child explores the world around it. The child is constantly moving, never resting. This is the nature of the spirit. A child is as closest to a soul you'll ever see in this earth, on this world. When do we stop moving? When do we become more, what do we call it, couch potatoes or other static forms? Is when we lose touch with the soul, to be honest. Because life by nature is on movement, is mobile. Now, I don't mean mobile phones or the mobility that's used today in technology. I mean mobile as a human being. You're a free spirit, always alive, always changing, always open to new experiences, enchantment, to be enchanted. When was the last time you were enchanted? Children are enchanted every second because they're learning all the time. So many people think, okay, once you learn everything, what's there more to be enchanted about? But that's not true. There's always more to learn. As we know, life is complicated. There are always new secrets. And what changes is that we cease to allow the angel out. What changes is that the externals of life take over, and they begin to harden. And as they begin to harden, that soul, that free soul, and its energy and spirit becomes concealed. And to the point where it can be almost invisible. And that's when we start losing hope in ourselves and confidence. And then the dynamic part of a person's life becomes compromised. And this is the secret to love, it's the secret to hope, it's the secret really to almost any type of positive future, optimistic future. Love. what happens when you love someone and then it becomes static? You know, we all know the sad story. People deeply in love, passionately in love, and then it becomes a ritual, becomes a habitual, becomes a rote by rote, and that's when it loses its sparks, as they say. What happened? What happened is that you allow the rituals of life to take over, and that which is loving, which comes from the inner part of people's souls as they touch each other, becomes minimized, compromised. And the only way that love can continue to exist is never through mechanics, it's through constant nourishment, constant watering, constantly allowing the soul to come out. And people without that soulfulness, love cannot last, just like a flower cannot last, will wilt if it's parched. So this is essentially, as I said, some form of introduction, I guess, to this, I don't like to call it a class, it sounds like too classifying, so we'll call it some people call it a Hasidic bull session, or it could be a type of farbrengen, a gathering, a synergy of souls, let's put it that way. And I've been doing this for many years, but I don't feel at all that it's static, because number one is you see new faces, and even the faces that I've seen before, I always see like new experiences within those faces. So when you look at it that way, it has a dynamic element. And you know yourselves, you probably have friends, every time you see them make you more depressed, and there are friends that when you see them make you smile, and you feel hopeful. We all have our Rolodexes, you can check it out, go through it and see which people you call, you know what kind of message you're going to get. Like if you have any optimism, they'll sure be happy to cooperate and make sure that you shouldn't have any hope. Left will dash your dreams. And then there are those people, usually the minority, that give you always something to expect, something to believe in. I think it's quite obvious which, if you review your list, which friends you should hold on to, and maybe the others should minimize contact. I'm not trying to create any tensions between friends, but sometimes our biggest trap is our old habits, and old habits include the people you hang around with. So if you need change in your life, the first thing you need to change sometimes is your environment, and the circle, the sphere that surrounds you day by day. The Talmud says, "Mishana mokem, mishana mazel." If you want to change your mazel, which is your luck, your destiny, you have to change your space. Mishana mokem. Now, space doesn't always mean space. Literally, can mean physically. You move from one community to another, from one city or a country to another. But space could also be your mind space, your attitudes. So Mishana Mokim, changing that is a vital thing. As they say in all types of healing circles, if nothing changes, nothing changes. I know that sounds redundant, but basically means we look for change, but we have not done anything to initiate that change. So what do you expect? How do you expect something to change if you haven't done an action brings a reaction? So it's a cause and effect type of thing. So, as a segue into the theme of this evening, which is obsession. I would like these themes: obsession, fanaticism, the fanatic. The actual title is The Fanatic, Healthy versus Unhealthy Passion, and Holy versus Unholy Obsessions. So has anybody in this room ever been obsessed with anything? Have you ever obsessed over anything? You don't have to raise your hands. Is anyone not obsessed? Let's put it this way. I don't think there's anyone on earth that has not obsessed over something. And we all know the nature of obsession is a very bizarre one. When obsession takes hold, it's literally like a stranglehold that can destroy you completely. You literally can think about nothing else but that thing that you're obsessed about. And even when you're in it, you can't find any way out. What do you do? And these obsessions take on many shapes and forms. It could be obsessions in the area of love, which of course is up there, where you're obsessed with somebody, whether it's a crush or it's a fixation or it's just plain illusion, but it's still, the obsession doesn't mean it has to be real. It's a real and only in the sense that you're obsessed with it. You can get obsessed with something and you really can't get your mind on it to anything else. So that, of course, becomes an obsession that can also become quite self-destructive, where other parts of your life get compromised. Addictions, of course, are another form of obsession, whether it's drug or alcohol or gambling or sexual or other form of addictions that sometimes are even subtler. They may not look like addictions, but you always can know if it's an addiction if it compromises and hurts others in the process. Because in other words, nothing can stop you. You need that right now. You need your fix, whatever that fix may be. And I should add, addiction also includes religious addiction. There's a thing called religious addiction. I don't know if you know that, but there is such a thing. It's basically anything that becomes a crutch that you use as an excuse that really compromises everything around you. So there are many forms of addictions. Now all these obsessions I've mentioned so far obviously are negative ones. At least their impact on us is negative. So how do we look at it? What exactly is an obsession? Obviously, and not to sound morbid, but dead people don't obsess, right? So you can also say obsession is a sign of life. Maybe too much life, life on steroids or something like that. It's like hyper-stimulated life. But to say that obsession itself per se, being obsessed with something, without suggesting what the object of that obsession is not necessarily purely evil. Even though you can't obsess about evil things or bad things that are destructive, but the idea that a human being gets fixated or committed to something, you can argue can also have a positive side. For instance, people who are obsessed, let's say, with people they love, will do everything to protect them, will go out of their way. God forbid a parent hears that a child is sick. So they don't just say, hey, really, who cares? And they're neutral and they're indifferent. Part of their so-called connection is, yes, you'll obsess. You'll do everything possible to run from one doctor to the next. I'm just using a negative example because it just brings the point out. So that is an obsession. Maybe the word obsession wouldn't really be the right word to be used, but you're obsessing to find, you'll do everything. You'll stop your job. You'll do everything. You'll stop everything in your life just to save a life of a person you care for. The same thing is you find the concept in Judaism, for example, Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is an expression used, literally means to give away your soul, to give away your will. Often it was used in history in the terms where Jews who gave their lives for their faith. Mesiras Nefesh. That they went on Mesiras Nefesh. They gave their lives to save another person. You see this. You see that type of nobility not so often, and thank God today it doesn't have to take on the shape as it did so much through history where Jews were threatened that either you bow down to an idol or you'll be burned at the stake, and which was quite common in the Middle Ages, the Inquisitions and so on. And you see people who their faith was more important to the point, yes, they were ready to die for their faith. That's not exactly a neutral stand. That is quite obsessive, you can call it. Quite extremist. Quite fanatical even. So the theme this evening is this issue with obsessions, passions, all these energies that can get extreme. But as I said earlier, the energy of it, as we'll discuss, is not necessarily a negative one. The question is only the extent of how far you carry it, and also what it's focused on. If the obsession is toward a healthy goal, so then you could say the obsession is also a healthy obsession, better than being mediocre or, as I said, neutral about it. If it's an unhealthy goal, so obviously the obsession also takes on an unhealthy shape and form. And then, of course, the extent. You can want something, but it doesn't have to be obsessing about it. You can want it, and want it strongly, but you also have a certain humility to know when to stop. If it doesn't come your way, you learn that this is something you have to give up, and not just continue to obsess. So this is part of the theme that I'm going to discuss this evening, and I hope it's relevant. As I said, since nobody raised their hand that they've never obsessed, so I'm assuming it's a relevant topic. And as usual, I try to choose topics that others don't discuss, because some of these issues, like obsession, or like I did a class a while back on lust and desire. These are my favorite, the vices. What are the 5 vices? I don't even know. I'm looking for a scholar in the room. Don't stare at him, I didn't mean it that way. Trust me, you're not the only person with vices in this room. Okay? But, so when I did that topic, the same topic, the reason I besides the fact that it's always good to be a little mischievous, so you talk about topics that are a little controversial, but the real thing is, for two reasons I want to discuss it. Number one is because some of the most important issues in life are the ones we carry, our little deep secrets inside of us, our little ugly secrets, if you wish. Maybe they're not so little. Our dark corners, and every one of us has those. And these are the things that we carry within, which often become forces that help demoralize and weaken our resolve, because things you can't talk about, or you're ashamed to talk about, or you're afraid to talk about, can become a cancer as well, because they start eating away at you. So this doesn't mean we have to go around sharing everything in our hearts. Obviously you have to have a measure of discretion, like that. The joke they tell about the Jewish guy who goes to see a priest, Christian priest, and he starts confessing his sins, and their sins pretty heavy sins. So the priest is like so taken by it. It's a great catch. A Jew's coming to confess his sins to a priest. So he says to him, "My son, what drove you to finally recognize the truth of Christianity?" He says, "Don't take it personally. I'm telling everybody." So there's a point where we see the phenomenon today quite intensely, where when there's years and years of silence, and when you break the silence, sometimes you don't know when to be quiet. And it's true, there are people who for years were silenced, were not allowed to speak in their homes, when they were hurt, not allowed to cry, or not allowed to express. And then when they're given the permission, often don't know the other extreme, when to stop. And I'm not judging them, I understand where it's coming from, because it's like a way to counterbalance years of silencing. But the fact is, ultimately you really have to find a balance. So there's an interesting expression in the Talmud that says two opinions. It says, Im yidag adam yasiach, the verse says. If a person is concerned, im yidag, daiga, a person has anxiety, yasiach. The solution is, the verse says, the pasuk in the Torah says, yasiach. Now what does yasiach mean? Now in Hebrew, yasiach can be pronounced, can be written yud samach yud ches. So that's one opinion in the Talmud. Yasiach comes from the word heschadas, which means to distract yourself. So if you have anxiety, you're concerned about something, distract yourself. Think about something else, focus on another area of your life, something positive. But then there's yasiach, not samach, but yasiach with a sin. It's a different Hebrew letter. And yasiach with a sin means, from the word sicha, to speak. In Hebrew, sicha means to speak. And this opinion holds in the Talmud that if you have something that bothers you, concerns you, that you have anxiety over, you should discuss it. You should speak with someone about it. Get it off your chest, so to speak. So one of the Hasidic Rebbes asked the question that these two opinions in the Talmud, it's fine to have two different opinions, but they happen to contradict each other. Because when you speak about something, it's the exact opposite of distracting yourself. Because then you're embellishing on it, you're elaborating. If you distract yourself, you don't go around speaking about it. So these two opinions seem to have like contradictory solutions to the same problem. And the answer given, which is extremely powerful psychological insight, is that when you speak about it to someone else, that you, not just to speak, like this guy in the joke who's telling everybody, but when you speak about it to someone you can trust, someone who cares, you actually release it. And that's the way you distract yourself. It's like you're giving it away. A similar idea is said when you go visit the sick in a hospital. It says that you take away 1/60th of the illness when you visit a sick person. So I remember when I was a child, I asked my father, does that mean if you visit someone 60 times, they'll become healed? So he said, not exactly. It doesn't work like that. So I always wondered, okay, so what does this mean? As you get older, you start understanding it's not a 60th in quantity. It's that you, when you visit someone, even psychologically, you help relieve them. They see there's someone that cares. And we know today when a person has strength, optimism, it helps strengthen the immunity system. People who have no one visiting them, God forbid, are lonely, despair, and that helps demoralize. And when you're demoralized, the immunity doesn't work as well. So it's about that type of ability, that we have the ability to help each other. Same concept is in coming up next week, to the period of the 3 weeks, the sad 3 weeks. But they're followed by 6, 7, after the 3 sad weeks of mourning over the destruction of the temple, which we'll discuss. Maybe we won't have to discuss it, maybe some things will happen. Come 7 weeks of Shiva de Nechemta, come 7 weeks of consolation. So I remember several years ago, we did one of the weekend, we did a camping retreat. There was a time we did some camping retreats in our wilder years. And I mean camping, I mean the real thing, the rustic with the whole tents and the works. And I remember these retreats always brought out all kinds of different, very powerful experiences. Because when you're in a natural environment and you can't run away to your conventional teddy bears and other security blankets, it brings out interesting things in people. Sometimes it also brings out things that are not so pleasant. So we had a whole plan, because people sometimes come and they're not really sure what they're ready to get. They may think it's a 5-star hotel or 5-star tenting experience, if there's such a thing. So I remember one year there was a woman that came, and we had very good staff. The staff would be very good at helping people set up. There were always unexpected things that could happen when you're out in the woods. Yeah, you could use your imagination. I don't mean any wild animals, anything like that, but other stuff. And yeah, lions and tigers and bears type of thing, right? So I remember this woman and all the staff, and we're very trained that when anyone's upset about something, you help them out to make sure everyone's comfortable. But there's one person who was really making everybody very comfortable, and she seemed to be very bitter. And finally she came to speak to me, and I saw that really I don't know if I could do anything with this woman. Now we're stuck here in the woods for Shabbos, I don't know what we're going to do here. So I tried to calm her down. She was furious. Everything was bad. The food was bad, the tent was bad, the woods was bad. I mean, nothing could work. At that point I realized that's probably not about us. Not that I told her that wouldn't have helped. So I just, whatever, at some point it was late at night, she got tired. But the next day, and I learned from my own experience, you never know what's going on in a person's heart, so I didn't judge her, nor did I criticize her. I just tried to be nice. Who knows what's happening? The next day, when it happened to be Shabbos Nachmu, which is the Shabbos after Tisha B'Av, which is called the Shabbos of consolation. When we say in the Haftarah, Nachmu, Nachmu Ami, where God consoles, the Prophet consoles the people after all the distress that they went through. So that when the Torah reading came, different people said a few words. Before the Torah reading, we had different people. And I shared a few words and said that the question is, it says in the Medrash that when God began to console the people, he didn't do the consolation himself, he sent an angel. He sent a prophet to console the people. So the Medrash says that the Jews said to God, returned and said, when you came to destroy the temple, to cause us misery, you came yourself. When it comes to console us, you send us messengers. We want you to come. And there's a whole process of the 7 weeks, how God finally, Anechi hu menachemchem, finally God does come and console them directly. Which of course has a lot of profound lessons, which I don't want to go into right now, it's a tangent. The reason I'm mentioning it is for the following reason. And I said, well, the question is this, why God was not wise enough to understand this? He needed Jews to tell and demand that he appear. You hurt somebody, you don't send a messenger to say, I'm sorry. You come say, I'm sorry yourself. You send a messenger to hurt someone, fine, then you send messengers. But you come yourself and did something that caused others anxiety, distress. So why did God have to wait till they asked for it? So the answer I gave was that, on the contrary, by God giving the power to other humans to console us, it was really a gift. That not only God can console us, but we actually have the power to console each other. So no one should know of this, but when you go visit someone at a shiva call, or other situations where you come to console somebody, you could say, how could we human beings, mortals, console other mortals? We also go through these anxieties and pains. How could one person in pain console another person in pain? Only God can console. So God said, no, I am actually imparting a part of my power to console you into human beings. That each of us has the power to console another, which is a profound lesson in healing, in therapy, in soul healing, that we have a power to help each other. I'm saying it regarding what I was discussing earlier, to answer that Rebbe gives, Yasiach, that if you speak about it with someone else, in a way you release it from yourself. That was his way of reconciling these two approaches. So all this goes back to why I feel it's important to talk about sometimes these some of the darker corners of our life: obsession, desire, passions. These aren't things that are easy to talk about. Besides the fact we may not even be aware of our own internal forces at work, but even if we are, you're not comfortable. So it can be embarrassing. That's one reason I'm discussing it. And the second is, and since I'm talking about it, no one here has to open up your heart, so don't worry about it. This is not a group therapy, so relax. The second reason is because I feel that in our day and age, it's critical, and I say critical, to demonstrate how the Torah addresses our personal and psychological issues. Because there's a great dichotomy and compartmentalization that goes on today. Starting from traditional Jews, meaning Jews who grew up with Torah and mitzvahs, and for them it's second nature. So you may think that a so-called religious Jew or observant Jew, Orthodox, whatever the label that is used, usually stereotypical label, you'd think that when it comes to the issues like, does an Orthodox Jew cry differently than an unorthodox Jew? You know, is there a difference between the tears of a Reformed conservative or Orthodox person? And what about love? So we know that these names, these labels, really don't affect the humanity which is common to us all. So when you talk about opening up a Torah, and we say the Torah is Chayenu v'Erech Yameinu, it's our life and our sustenance. So you would assume that a person who's grown up their entire life with Torah, any problem they have in life, whether it's a marital, domestic issue in their home, shalom bayis issue, or it's a psychological issue between them and their parents, or between you and yourself, that you open up a Torah and you resolve it. You open up a parsha and say, okay, what does it say in the parsha? And now you know. Which would really mean that anyone who's a Torah devout person shouldn't need any therapy, shouldn't need to pay for it. They could just look into the Torah and the Torah resolve all their issues. Well, that's nice theory. However, it doesn't exist in the community I've ever discovered in this world. So what does that tell us? That the Torah doesn't address the most important issues of your life? Now, I understand medical situations. The Torah says a person has, God forbid, a medical situation. The Torah gives permission for a doctor, a healer, to heal. But when it comes to personal issues, the Torah doesn't address our most important, the issues that are closest to our heart. What exactly is it addressing? If God gave us a Torah, the God who created life gave us a blueprint for life. It isn't just about mechanically doing a bunch of mitzvahs that doesn't have anything to do with the biggest issues that we struggle with. And I will tell you, there are many Jews who will argue this point, and they've argued with me. They say it's not true. Psychological, emotional issues is one thing. The Torah is about what you're supposed to do every day. You wake up, you wash your hands, you daven, you pray, you study, you give charity. It's about mechanics. Whoever said the Torah was given to deal with the matters of the soul and the heart and soul? Well, I'm not going to go into debate on the issue. The question only that I would ask is, if the Torah doesn't address that, so basically the Torah is irrelevant when it comes to the most important matters of life. So it's about mechanics and behavior, rituals, and when it comes to the most important matters, where do you turn to then? If the Torah doesn't give direction there, who do you turn to? Who's going to give you direction? Which book? Is there a holier book than the Torah that's going to give you direction when it comes to your emotional life? So to me, the whole concept is foreign. And then, of course, the larger segment of the Jewish population today, which I would say are the non-affiliated or the non-observant, definitely don't see relevance in the Torah to their personal lives. Because if they did, they would look for it. Most of us, the books we read, the doctors we go to, the shows we watch, the music we listen to, the therapists we go to, we visit, are about those that we feel we find some relevance there. We may be misguided, but we definitely feel relevance. And then if you don't find it in one place, you look elsewhere. So it's no surprise that many Jews find difficulty when they open up a Bible, a Chumash, or a Talmud, or a Shulchan Aruch, code of Jewish law. Very difficult for them to embrace it when they don't see what it means for them. How does it speak to me? Which is why I put so much focus in this class, I don't want to call it class, this gathering, into addressing this schism, that the Torah does address your personal life. And that's why it's well worth finding out what it says, and it's well worth, no pun intended, obsessing over in a healthy way. For these reasons, I want to address this topic. Now, this week's chapter is basically the chapter of obsession. Why? Because we talk about the chapter of Pinchas. Pinchas was an individual who is introduced in last week's chapter. I mean, his name is mentioned, I believe, earlier, but his primary time on stage is in last week's chapter with a very disturbing incident. What happens is, as if you're familiar with the story in the Torah, that Balak, the king of Moab, was threatened by the Jewish people, and he was looking for a way to destroy them. So he went and commissioned and hired a prophet. His name was Balaam, who was a true prophet. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says that he was as prophet. It says that there was no prophet in Israel as great as Moses, but in Israel not. But outside of the Jewish people, there was a prophet that was as great, Balaam. So the Torah itself testifies that Balaam had true mystical prophetic powers. And therefore, Balak wanted to use him to curse the Jewish people. Basically, to put a spell upon them, in some way to weaken their strength. And to make a long story short, in last week's chapter, as much as Balaam would like to do it, as much as he tried, ultimately he was a prophet. And as he stated several times, I can only say what God tells me to say. Which is why you're coming to me in the first place. Power of God, not my own. And what God told him to say was not only not curses, it was great blessings. Some of the greatest blessings ever bestowed upon the people, the Jewish people, were uttered by Balaam. Prayers that we say till this day in the prayer every morning. Blessings that we say every morning in the prayer service. Matevu Alecha Yaakov in the morning, and others. Balaam prophesied the coming of Mashiach. This is the primary place in the Bible, in the Chumash, where Mashiach is mentioned, as Maimonides explains, the Rambam explains. So Balaam ends up giving us some of the greatest blessings and greatest prophecies in a positive way. However, not to be left totally defeated, before the curtain closes on last week's chapter, Balaam tells Balak a little secret. He says, the Jewish people you will not be able to curse. God is with them, and they are too powerful, because they have divine, basically, protection for them to be hurt by us. You want to hurt them, you have to have them hurt themselves. Which, of course, is another profound psychological lesson, that you are your own worst enemy. That unless you are vulnerable or fragile, nobody else can hurt you. And he tells them you have to find a way to let them hurt themselves. And he gives a great idea. It was a brilliant idea. He says, send the Moabite women, the beautiful women, to seduce them. So instead of curses, instead of looking for some mystical tricks and magic, black magic, instead what you should do is just send some women to seduce them, and they will succumb to that. That's when you will get to them. You will make them vulnerable. And that's exactly what happens. And as the chapter concludes, Zimri, one of the leaders of the tribes, desecrates God with one of these Moabite women in public, which was a unbelievable desecration. And it was Pinchas that becomes a zealot, kanois, which is the word for zealotry, zealousness, a religious fanatic in simple English, and goes and, without asking anyone, without a trial, drives a spear through Zimri and this woman and kills them both. This is the only episode in the Torah where you find an act of zealotry that is condoned. There were acts of zealotry, but they were not condoned. Shimon and Levi also did some strong, violent acts against Shem, even though they were justified here and there, but it wasn't left. They were not blessed for it. As a matter of fact, it was the opposite. And there are other acts that were not considered to be positive. In general, the Torah does not believe in zealotry of this nature. There's a thing called a court of law. There's halachas, there's law and justice. Not everybody can take the law in their own hands, or else you'll have lynch mobs. And the Torah is very, very sensitive to the fact that when you are driven by religious passion, and especially if you think it's God's will, you can do things that are horrendous. So the Torah puts on very strong brakes and guidelines and regulations that not allow that type of fanaticism to ever take hold. But it's interesting, therefore, that there's one exception. The only exception in all of history is the story of Pinchas. As this chapter continues, Pinchas is not only not reprimanded, he's rewarded. He's rewarded, called a Kohen, becomes a priest. As God says, because you defended my honor and you fought my battle with such zeal, that I reward you. So the first thing I have to state as a disclaimer, as I just stated, and I'll reiterate just in case nobody got the message, this is the only exception. Everywhere else, the Torah absolutely does not allow for any type of such fanaticism, because, as I said, holy wars in the name of God can create the biggest destruction. And this isn't just a theory, we've seen it through history. The Christians terrorized the world for close to 2 millennia in the name of so-called religion. You see it today. You see fundamentalists, Muslim fundamentalists, fanatics, in the name of religion. I mean, we see it hopefully not every day, but it's a looming threat all the time. September 11th brought it home to New York and America. Israel, unfortunately, is at the brunt of it, but it's in the Middle East. It's a breeding ground, and it's not gone away. Hopefully we don't see any of it, but the people who perpetrate it do it not in the name of being criminals. They do it in the name of God. So many, as we know today, they're radical atheists that go to the other extreme and say that religion has only brought misery to this world. And the solution, therefore, is to cut out all faith and religion, then you don't have these type of passions. But besides the fact that that's not exactly an accurate statement, that Hitler was hardly a religious fanatic, and nor was Stalin. They were actually people who despised religion. So to say that the greatest killings were done by people who have faith is not necessarily true. But you also can't deny that many great killings were done in the name of faith. And some would even argue that Hitler could never have pulled off what he did had there not been profound anti-Semitism and the Jews as Christ killers, etc., etc. In other words, he was using religious passions, as misguided as they were, to perpetrate genocide. But regardless, there's no question that religion has the potential for profound damage if it's not guided. So the Torah is extremely sensitive to this. That's why you don't find anywhere in the Torah ever permission, even to Moses. In this case, it wasn't Moses that did it. It was Pinchas. As a matter of fact, it says in the Torah that it was Moses, the law was hidden from Moses of kanoim poegin boy, which is a certain particular law in a situation of such desecration, etc. And it was Pinchas, almost an unknown figure, that pulled it off. So we clearly have to understand that this exception is not meant to be a rule, nor is it meant to be any type of permission ever for such behavior. Yet the Torah still feels the need to document it and tell us, and condone it. So clearly the Torah feels that there's something about we call obsession, or fanaticism, or radical extremism, there is a certain place for it, but in a very, very controlled and in a very, very defined setting. So what does it mean psychologically? So let's go back to the essence of what all obsession and all extremism is about. When a person is obsessed with something, as I said earlier, they're completely consumed with it. Where do you find the word consumed used most often? In the context of fire. Fire consumes things. When we say water, you can say water floods, but the word consumption, consume, is associated with fire. What happens when fire is uncontrolled? Fire will destroy everything in its path and can become the most destructive force, as we see. At the same time, what happens if we had no fire in this world altogether? there would be no life. If there was no warmth, no heat, there would be no life in this earth. Heat and fire is necessary for life. Starting from sunlight. The sun is a very hot object. You don't want to get too close to it. But with the right distance, the sun is necessary for life on this earth. And same thing in our own lives. The weather, cold weather, you need to heat. You want a warm food. On a personal level, love, nurturing has to be warm. We need warmth. Human beings need warmth from each other. If we were just old, cold creatures. And unfortunately, you see the damage of parents who are cold to their own children. So warmth is a necessity in life. So you have here this so-called dilemma. Uncontrolled fire destroys. No fire at all also destroys. So what do you do? As I said earlier, any type of passion is driven by a healthy thing. It's a sign of life. There's no life, there's no passion, obviously. So this goes back to what I discussed a while back, same idea with desire. What Jewish mystics teach, the Hasidic masters in particular, and this is a very key concept, so I'll repeat it if necessary, but it's really, if you understand this concept, it can be a tremendous asset in understanding a lot of your own vices and controlling them. Not that it's going to automatically work, but it's critical to understand this distinction. The distinction, as the Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi puts it, for instance, he says that there's a concept called the Koyach HaMesava and there's a Taiva. There's a power to desire something, and then there's the object of desire. It's not the same thing. When a person is obsessed with something, extreme about anything, so there's the power of that energy, and then there's the object of that energy, where it's being directed. And he says the power of that type of energy is always holy, is always healthy. It's the object of that, where you're focusing, that can be destructive or unholy. So with the word desire, for example, you say I desire something, that doesn't mean that's not a bad thing. Unfortunately, without getting into names, certain religions and certain systems, because they've seen, we'll call this the sin of desire, like in Christianity, the concept of original sin, because Adam and Eve desired, they had a taiva, they desired to eat from the tree of knowledge. So that became that desire itself is unhealthy. That's a big mistake. Desire is always healthy. It's what you desire is that could be healthy or unhealthy. If we had no desires in our lives, we would not be human beings. There's also no desire to be closer to God. That's also desire. As a matter of fact, in the Medrash it says, when it explains the purpose of existence, it's interesting, it uses a word that you wouldn't expect. It says, God desired, Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu. God had a lust and a desire to have a home on this earth. Why would the Torah use a word that could be associated with such negativity? Because desire and lust per se is not necessarily a negative. It can be the root of most powerful forces in our lives. Passion is healthy or unhealthy? The answer is, depends what you use it for. But sometimes, because passion creates, and desire and obsession, so much damage, we throw out the baby in the bathwater. Meaning that we decide, you know what, the whole thing is too dangerous, let's not go there altogether. This you see, unfortunately, quite common. Let's say children in school. You know, in schools, most schools are directed toward the average student. Not toward the excellent ones and not toward the poor students. So if you have an eccentric kid in a class, someone who's very talented, let's say, musically talented, which usually comes with other side effects, like, for example, they don't have patience to sit in the class all day. They have this. Most schools don't know how to deal with children like this. Most parents don't know how to deal with them, for that matter. What usually happens is, unfortunately, you try to force the child into a straitjacket to be something they're not. Either to suppress that type of talent, or to insist and impose upon them disciplines that the child is simply incapable of absorbing. Now, the intention here of the parent or the educator is, how do you know which? Every child needs discipline. No one's arguing that. But what happens if you're trying to force a square into a circle, or a circle into a square hole? You can destroy a lot. People who were suppressed with certain talents that they had, or skills, musical skills or other talents, artistic talents, they were suppressed as children, what do you think really happens? It doesn't go away. A human talent that you're born with never goes away. What happens is a deep, deep anger begins to build up. It begins to implode. A vacuum, this void, that there's a part of you that's never been realized. And at some point it has to explode. Sometimes it explodes the other way, meaning you don't go out and actualize it, you just rebel against everything, and it becomes very destructive. Sometimes it explodes that you do something to act on it. But I'm not going to go to every example. The point is that one has to distinguish between the energy of something and where it's directed. So the concept of obsession for the Torah to condone, obviously, a person like in the case of zealotry, being a zealot, if that would be condoned, it can cause unbelievable damage. And the Torah does not allow for that. That's why you don't find anywhere in Jewish history religious zealotry. You never find crusades. The Jews never went marching through any country on a religious crusade to convert everybody. This is a complete creation of Christianity and later Islam. Well, and as a matter of fact, if anybody wants to convert to Judaism, you actually dissuade them. For the Christians and for Muslims, and I'm not here to criticize, it just happens to be facts on the observation, it's the greatest thing if somebody wants to convert. Today it's like one of the biggest things is how fast Muslims are growing. Where are they coming from? It's conversion. And especially if it's a Jew that wants to convert. For Jews, it was never considered a virtue. There are definitely converts. There were some of the greatest Jewish leaders were converts. So it's not that Jews don't accept converts. And when they do, the Torah makes strong emphasis many times how you have to accept a convert just as a born Jew. And there's no discrimination. But to go through that process is not easy. First the person is dissuaded, once, twice. Explained why? Because Judaism doesn't feel that you have to be Jewish to serve God. If God created a person, whatever they are, they can serve God the way they are. You don't have to be Jewish to serve God. So that confidence, you don't have to convert everyone to show that you're right, so to speak. Maybe the Christians felt this way because as long as the Jews were around, then what do you need a New Testament if the old one is good? We're not going to get into that right now. I don't want to offend anyone either. But the point is that the consequences, the side effects of any type of extremism are very, very powerful, and therefore the Torah cannot allow for it. However, the Torah in its wisdom psychologically knows that if it doesn't leave any room for it, we would get the impression that the idea of being completely committed to extreme to something is not healthy. That's not true. So once in history, there was a man called Pinchas that rose. And it's interesting, if you read the story of Pinchas, you see he was the most mild-mannered of all. He wasn't known as an extremist. He wasn't from Shimon and Levi, the two tribes that were known as the warriors, the aggressive ones, who went on a rampage in Shechem and then in general were of that nature. Pinchas was of a mild-mannered person, man of peace. And when he rose and did this, it was coming completely from humility. It wasn't suddenly his violent urges were being fed. You see, the concern is, if someone's doing something for extremist reasons, even if they justify it in the name of God, how do you know? Maybe it's your violent nature that's working here, and it's not about God altogether, which is another tragic dilemma. I remember someone coming to me, I remember it was Saturday night, I remember it vividly, because he came to me, and I saw this is a problem. He tells me, he's looking to find exactly where it says in the Torah that a wife must listen to her husband. And he was foaming at his mouth when he was telling this to me. So I could imagine what was going on here. So I said to him, why do you ask, by the way? Is it relevant to you? She says, no, not me. I have a friend. Yeah. So it reminded me of the story where a guy came to a Rebbe and said, my friend did something terrible and he's looking for a way to correct it. And he's ashamed to come to you, so he sent me. So the Rebbe said to him, so why did he have to expose himself to you? He could have come to me and said he has a friend. Which is of course what he did. So I didn't say that to him. So I took advantage that since he's so-called anonymous and it's not him, so I said, since it's not you, let me be blunt. And I said, there's some people who are just cruel people, and then they try to find sources in the Torah to justify their cruelty. He got so angry, he was about to beat me. And I said, so I'll be very honest with you. I don't know anywhere in the Torah that it says what you're saying. The opposite, it says that a man is supposed to honor his wife more than himself. That's what I know. Which it does say. It says, that you're supposed to chaviv ishtei yesim migufay, which he did not like. And I said, so if you're asking me, that's what I know, and I think that's the way what you should tell your friend. Anyway, he was, as I said, quite angry. But I saw there a perfect example of something that many people do. That Tzemach Tzedek puts it this way: there are people who just have an aggressive nature, and when you see someone do something wrong, they're always first online to criticize and to find ways to judge that person. When it comes to finding merit in someone, they're never around. Now, they may, in that situation, they may even be right, but why are you online? What does that have to do with it? It's not the merit. It's you're looking to dress up your aggression and judgmental nature in holy garb, and that's another so-called tragic distortion, of course. So Pinchas was not that type at all. As a matter of fact, it was shocking that this man, of all people, there were plenty of people among the Jews that were zealots, were known to be zealots. And as I said, Shimon and Levi, those two tribes, were generally they were that way. So you could say that if it came from there, then it'd be a problem. But the fact that it was Pinchas, and that's why God gave him the blessing of Shalom, Yishalom, that you'll be a man of peace. It sounds so weird. He just did a radical act of killing two people who desecrated God, and God gives him the blessing of peace. Because that's what Pinchas was about. It did not come from his aggression. He had no aggression in him. Again, this is not a justification. It doesn't mean that if you're humble you can suddenly become a zealot. That's not what it means either. It just means that in the one instance where the Torah describes the story, and it could have easily not told us, it's trying to tell us that there are in all of us a situation that if you have an obsession, you can redeem it. And you redeem it by channeling it. That's the key thing. How do you unchain that energy of desire, as I said, the power of obsession, and the object of obsession? That's the key thing. Some of you that know me may know that I'm somewhat of an extremist. What do I mean by that? I feel that if something is right, it's all the way right, and if it's wrong, it's all the way wrong. Meaning, there's people who choose to say, it's more of a mediocre approach. Now, when you're extreme about something, it can be very disconcerting, because when you want to create something, whether it's writing, I do writing and other things, and you're like a perfectionist, and you have to you go crazy about researching something thoroughly to the point of ad nauseum, to yourself even. On the other hand, if I were to cut out that part of myself, then there would be great compromises in a lot of positive things. So a person obsesses, even if it's the worst obsession possible. The point is that it's the object that you're obsessing about that can be destructive. It's not that if you have the power to obsess, that's a great gift. Then learn to obsess about holy things. So had the Torah not told us the story about Pinchas, we would never know this message. You'd think, okay, any obsession has to be cut out and that's it. The Torah is saying, no, you're a strong person. You're radical. I remember a guy came to me, wanted me to help him. He told me the first thing he announced to me that he's a kanoi, a zealot. Now, what that means in contemporary language means, I'm not going to go into what it means, but he's a zealot, and he wanted me to help him get to somebody he needed to raise money for a mikveh. Now, I didn't know if I could help him or not, but I saw an opportunity, so I said to him, you know what? I'll help you on one condition. That if you channel your zealousness, your zealousness, what is it? Your zeal, into one mitzvah. I asked him, what are you a zealot about? He's a zealot on how he eats kosher, and how he doesn't mingle with anyone that doesn't dress like him, and how he goes to certain synagogues and never to any others. He had a whole list of things that he's very zealous about, and how he criticizes anyone that doesn't keep the mitzvahs exactly as he does. He had a whole list, very interesting. So I said, I'll help you with all my heart and soul, on one condition: if you become zealous in the biggest mitzvah of all. So he said, what's that? I said, you tell me, what's the biggest mitzvah of all? V'ahavta l'recha kamecha, to love a fellow like yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. That's the fundamental rule of all of Torah. Hillel says this is the entire Torah, everything else is commentary. This is not some modern creation. This goes back, this is a verse in Chumash. I said, if you're zealous about that if you go out and you look for every Jew that exists on this earth, and there are 50 million of them, with such love, I'll be happy to help you. Not only didn't know what I was talking about, this is not a zealot. This is a person who's programmed to think a certain way, and he's calling it zealousness. And he's committed, he's obsessed with his own program. Imagine someone who's programmed a certain way and they're obsessed to make sure the program keeps running. That's not called zealousness. Zealotry in the name of God means that it's not about you, it's about God. So even the one instance the Torah says, you're talking about a Pinchas who didn't do it for it. He had no gain from it. It wasn't because he was programmed this way. It was actually against his nature. So again, even then it's not a justification. But the point is that if a person is a obsessive character, or you have a particular obsession in your life, the approach I would take is, number one, is to see that the person has potential to be so committed. That's great. You got a person who really can obsess like that. Unfortunately, what you find is, I tried this once on someone, it didn't work exactly as I planned it. Someone came to me with an obsession that was, they thought they fell in love with someone, and they were convinced that that person loves them too, which was a complete illusion I knew personally. And every time that person looked a certain way at them, they thought that, oh wow, it just confirms everything I always thought, that type of thing. And they were just completely, was destroying their life. Work, friends, other opportunities. And the person came to me to try to help me convince that guy that she's obsessed with, that it's really for him. Well, she found the wrong guy to come to, but she didn't know that at the time. So I saw, I did see that a person could be so obsessed. I tried to, obviously you don't go into philosophical discussion when a person is so emotionally distraught. But in my mind I said to myself, if this person could ever free themselves of this obsession and direct it somewhere positive, it can be a very powerful tool, an asset. What happened was that ultimately it fell apart, because the other guy got married, and it was clear that's never going to happen. And she was depressed for a few years. And then later, when I spoke to her once, I remember after a while, I said to her, I remember when you were in that state, you just showed me you had such energy, and I don't see you investing such energy in anything anymore. Negative things, thank God, but positive things. And it was interesting to me, because I thought to myself, why is it only when it comes to some type of unhealthy things that she had such energy? Where did this energy go? Because it's easier. In this crazy world we live, sometimes things that are unhealthy seem easier to direct our attention to. And that can be for many reasons. Sometimes we just always choose the wrong person, or our own worst enemy, as I said. I'm not going to go into analyzing all of that. But I will say the following, that a person who obsesses, no, that does not mean that everything about you is bad. On the contrary, the fact that you have such power means that you can change worlds. If only you would obsess about something that was really holy and powerful. And it's a big lesson to be, because I remember when I heard this the first time and I studied it, it was very freeing for me. Because when you have that type of personality and you're extreme about something, you sometimes see it's not healthy to be extreme. So you start saying to yourself, maybe you got to just moderate yourself and start weakening. Maybe not be so passionate about everything that comes your way. And that's not true. Passion is always a healthy thing. You just have to know it's like a fire. Like I mentioned, a fire can consume and a fire can warm. And when you understand how to channel it, which takes a lot of work, no question, and above all, it takes humility to get beyond your own objects of desire. When you get to that place, that is when you really become a great person. Now, why is humility so necessary? Because you see, you focus on something and you get fixated on it. You decided this is what you need. Who said that? That's not obsession. That's where you came and decided this is what you need, and then you bring that soul fire of your energy and obsess about it. But if someone were able to tell you, maybe this is not what you need, which requires humility to come to such an understanding, then you can find ways to obsess about something healthier that is necessary. That's why humility is such a vital component. Now, how does one reach humility? Unfortunately, there are two ways, only two ways. Usually only two ways. Unfortunately, I mean, only one was unfortunate. The other one is not so unfortunate. The unfortunate way is when you're broken. We are humbled when we're broken. When we tried something, when we invested in something, when we put a lot of effort, and it didn't work out. And to a point where you actually have to acknowledge it didn't work out. That's also an achievement. Sometimes you convince yourself you're in denial, you think it did work out. So when we're broken, sometimes a death, a loss, trauma, anything that really shakes us up is one of the, as I said, sad and tragic ways that people get humbled. And then there's another way. There's another way is when you embrace the reality that there's something greater than you are. I didn't use the word God, even though that's what I meant, because you know the reason. As I've shared many times, the word God scares people. But when you embrace a reality that's higher than yourself, that's the second way a person reaches humility. And I don't mean as lip service. I mean truly understand that. Look, the first of the 12-step program, which is taken from many sources, and that's in the case, of course, the first approach, which is when people are broken. You know, I surrender and realize I'm not in control of my life, and I surrender to a force that's higher than myself. That comes to people who they lost control over their lives, and they have no choice but to embrace that. But you could also embrace that without necessarily wait to be broken. There was once a Rebbe that made a statement. It's very strong to repeat, but it's important to hear from time to time. He once told somebody, a chassid of his, he said, listen, everybody in this life will be broken. You have two options. Break yourself, because if you wait till God breaks you, sometimes it's without rachmanis, sometimes without mercy. Now, it's an extremely strong statement to say, but it's a very true statement. Hemingway, Lahavdil, said, life breaks all people, and some are stronger in the broken places. And then he proceeded, of course, to take his own life. So clearly he wasn't one of those stronger ones. What this Rebbe was saying was that life is going to throw curveballs to all of us. And you don't wait till a storm strikes before you reinforce your life. A person who knows how to achieve humility, we call in the Kabbalistic terminology, hoid, that eighth of the 10 sfirot, hod, yesod, malchus, hoid. Hoid means also flexibility, a yielding. A person who knows how to yield in life, then when a storm strikes, you can't be broken because you know how to yield. Look at what happens in a field when a storm strikes. So those stalks that are not hard and inflexible will bend with the wind. And those that are very hard, kashik ka'aras, will break. So it says, La'elam yehei adam rach kekanan. Always be flexible and soft, like a reed, and not as hard like a cider. So humility is something we can initiate, and we don't have to wait for something to happen. And that is why we start every morning saying Moda'ani. The word Moda, Hoid, I acknowledge, it's awareness that there's something higher than you. This may again sound simple, but it's a secret to all real growth and the secret to all power. Using the terminology bittul. To free oneself of obsession, only two things can happen. Either you're going to be broken, you'll see that something happens and that will devastate you, and then you'll have no choice but that'll free you from your addiction. Or you come to realize it's not all about you. There's a bigger plan. You can do your part, but you cannot control your destiny. You control your destiny, you know when you let go of fixating on what you think your destiny should be. Then you start controlling it, ironically. And that takes humility. Humility comes in many shapes. Sometimes it requires talking to someone that's not you, who can give you another objective viewpoint. And it's one of the hardest things to do when you're, of course, in the throes of an obsessive desire. That's why humility should be built before. You don't wait till a storm strikes to become flexible like a reed. You know, the strong The strength that you build happens before the storm strikes. The storm in this case is the obsession. So once a person is consumed by the fire of obsession, by the extreme fanatical energy of any passion, then it's very, very difficult. You can't suddenly say, okay, how do I turn on the humility button? The obsession has now completely consumed you. It's like a fire that's taken over. It's consumed you like a fire. How do you suddenly put out a fire when it's burning all over? What you do is, before the fire begins, is you build that humility. And the second thing a person needs to do to preempt this is to find passions that are healthy. To find a cause that's not about you, that you can channel your passions into. Yes, if that guy who called himself a zealot had followed my suggestion, I don't know if he was able to, technically, but he had the resources, but if he was able to travel around the world and try to meet every Jew in the world and show love and compassion with passion, guaranteed that would prevent a lot of issues in his life. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what all of us are meant to do. We can't just suddenly pack our bags and start traveling all over the world. But every one of us here has a sphere of influence. We all go back to our lives tomorrow, tonight, and why not start looking for something to be passionate about? Imagine if you can build something on your own, then you don't have to wait for your passion to suddenly get caught by some type of distraction or seductive force, and then it's not going to be up to you. It's going to be up to the fire is going to start burning. Now, if you don't feel you have any passion in your soul, that's another story. I would say that everybody does have. It's the question of measure. So think about that. Make that maybe a good project for everybody here, is to start looking for some healthy passion. If you need ideas, I can be happy to provide you plenty of ideas. There are many things that need healing in this world and help. It's not a perfect world, it's far from a perfect world. And therefore there are many things that can require a good passionate cause. And yeah, passion that's obsessive. Obsessive means as soon as you wake up in the morning you think about it. I mean, before you go to sleep you think about it. But it's one that is helping others, not just about what you decided is good for you. So it's a form of, like, I guess you could say it's a chemistry. Humility plus passion can change the world. That's what it comes down to. One without the other. Obviously humility without passion, you may be humble but you won't be motivated. And passion without humility is, of course, what I talked about this evening, is a destructive force. So that is the message that we have from Pinchas. A message that is that there is times that zealousness and passion and has to be channeled. Obviously, don't choose and buy a spear tomorrow morning and look for some Zimri and Midianite woman to spear. That's not what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be literal, but you can. There are things you can spare without killing them, and spare some of the help undermine some of the more destructive forces in this world, and it can be done in a way that doesn't have to require violence or murder or bloodshedding. The story of Pinchas, the details of this particular story can be discussed. It's not that relevant to the theme here. The theme here is how we apply it to our lives. To find something that's passionate and humble. And if you do it with humility, as I said, you really can change much in this world. So, I will make one disclaimer. Somebody suffers from called compulsive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. They're still wondering whether it's a disorder or it's something we bring upon ourselves, or is it medical, chemical. But regardless, obviously anything that's clinical in nature, your will is not going to be enough to help. Sometimes one needs other help, like medication and so on. So I wasn't discussing that. I'm just saying it for the record, because both for you in this room and also on the web, I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. There are things that we need medical help for. However, I would say most situations of obsessions that I've seen, they're usually man-made, meaning it's something that comes from ourselves. And it's an important thing to know that the deepest, darkest place in your life, where you think you carry a lot of something that's very ugly or dirty or obsessive, can be also the fire of your soul. And you have to recognize that it's something that's holy, and it's about how you channel it, not about the force itself. So the force should never terrify us. Just like the sun shouldn't terrify us, nor heat, nor fire. It's about how you channel it, you use it to do something great and positive. And for myself, when I was a younger man, when you're in your youth, your teen years, so passions and I don't know about obsessions. Obsessions, I think, happen when you get a little older. But passions and youthful energy, rebellious energy, is very strong as you're younger. And I remember hearing once my mentor, the Rebbe, speaking about the rebellion of young people and how we shouldn't. There are those that argue that rebellion in young people is an unhealthy thing because they rebel against rules, against authority, against the norms of society. And he said something that really changed my life, I must say, that the rebellion in young people comes from the fire of the soul that refuses to conform to the status quo and wants to change the world but is frustrated and doesn't know how. And adults would do well to use their seasoning and experience to help channel this into a spiritual revolution. And maybe I didn't understand it completely at the time, but when I did hear it for the first time, it sparked in me that wish to be part of such a revolution. So I invite you all to this revolution, everyone in their own way, and I do believe that we can create revolution. It doesn't have to be in a radical, in the sense of violent way. I know a Russian guy who has like communist ideology, very talented guy, but he's a little crazy. And he always tells me, you want to change the world, you have to execute somebody. That's what he says. History, you never change the world without executing something. So that's not what I'm referring to. So I'm not calling for that. But there's revolution that can be done in subtle ways too. They call it, there's a spiritual revolution, there's technological revolution, we call it information revolution. So there are many revolutions. So this is very much the driving force behind why I sit here, behind the Meaningful Life Center, behind all the work we do. And in the near future you're going to hear about some revolutions in the air happening here in New York. And as I said, I welcome you all to join, and I shall join you in your revolution as well. So everyone have a very good evening. I want to say this class is dedicated by a good friend, Mark Belinsky, in memory of his grandmother, Sarah Bat Moshe. The yard site is on 10th of Tammuz. And now we'll be here again. We're live on the web. I know some friends here that have gotten spoiled a little. So glad to see you. But soon we'll have the web, we'll be able to see each other, so it won't be as comfortable maybe. But I welcome you. I thank you all for coming, and I welcome you again next Wednesday night. And we're here every Wednesday night. And if you haven't left your email address here, if you do, firstly I'll send you the weekly email we send out here. I write a weekly essay. In addition, we'll also send you if there's any updates, any last minute changes or locations or topics and what's going on, we'll be happy to send you as well. So thank you again. If anybody wants to dedicate a class or needs any other help in any way, if you want to sign up to Revolution, so you can feel free to speak to me or to Velvel. You don't have to give your full names if you're afraid that the counter-revolutionaries will be after you. So again, everyone, a great night, and it was a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I ask you